review the F1, please. The second race in Austria. What happened on the weekend, boys?
Yeah.
Well, before we jump into the race,
quick news.
Lewis Hamilton 2-year extension, which is probably bigger news than a lot of people are making it out to be. Because everyone kind of said, 2-year extension, that's cool. Lewis is going to be around. This is huge. Honestly, he's going to stay at Mercedes. He was umming about the 1 year last year, possibly retiring. Do I want to then take over Michael Schumacher's record for championships won? He's got to compete, of course, with Tom Brady and I can't remember the name. There was 114 hot dog competitions, but the hot dog eating competitions, that blew up in social media this week. He's won 14 straight.
I know which one I'd rather be the champion of.
Yeah.
Hot
dogs are pretty good, yeah.
Sure.
He set my record, 76 in 10 minutes.
That, yeah.
So, elite athlete, they're right there. But Hamilton, another 2 years. Whether that kind of signals that maybe he doesn't think Mercedes are there this year and he's hoping when they bring in the new rules next year, they're there and can compete.
Yeah, well,
it's interesting because that'll make him, is he 38 at the moment? 3 to 40?
Yeah, it might be a touch younger.
Younger, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's essentially saying, look, this year's probably done,
I hope
which
not.
is surprising. I would have thought that they would push a little bit harder. He's 36 years old. And then... I guess the 2 years is next year's going to be rebuild for new regulations because Mercedes, they're going to have to close a huge spend gap to get their car to where it needs to be.
Yeah, well, they've already got the cap. I think it's the 300 million pounds cap at the moment across the teams, which is significant for Red Bull and Mercedes because they were spending more than that. But the other teams, not so much, and they can kind of get some parity. Which I think we're seeing a lot of good. And we'll get to that in a minute. In the middle of the pack. The middle of the pack competition's been excellent.
Yeah, Aston Martin's starting to come up the pack. But essentially that's saying Mercedes rebuild next year, 2023, I guess it is now, is when he expects to be able to compete for the World Championship.
Yeah. You never know. But next year with all the regulation changes, there could be, who knows what will have the best car at that and what adapts to that the best with all that new rules coming in. You'd think it'd be Mercedes and Red Bull, considering the class of talent of engineers and the team factories they've got there.
Yeah, Red Bull's going to be an interesting one because they are taking on manufacture of their engines next year. So they won't be relying on Honda, so they need to bring a lot of that in-house. And
so they were Honda this year. Were they Honda last year or was it Renault last year? I can't remember when they switched.
Good question. They switched the same year Ricciardo went across to Renault.
2 years ago. Right? He spent 2 years at Renault.
Yep.
Yeah,
it must have been then.
Yeah, so they've only had Honda then for this year.
Full season this year, I'd say,
Yeah, very interesting. So this race, though, Austria, the second race, exact same track as last week. Quick summary, Max dominated pillar to post. He was so much quicker than everyone else.
Yeah.
Comfortable enough that he actually pitted for new tyres towards the end of the race so he'd go get a fastest lap, which then gets him an extra point. He had enough room between him and second place. Second place was Bottas.
Yeah, 20 odd seconds, I think. And
what was really good to see, Lando started second, finished third in this. Actually got ahead of Hamilton. Hamilton had his struggles with rear aero. I think he damaged some stuff on the curbs and was a little bit slow.
Yeah.
Which, slow, still finished fourth.
I mean, and interestingly as well, you can't really say based on how the race went out, but Lando did get that penalty close to the start of the race, 5 second penalty. He was only 2-3 seconds behind Bottas. So
3 seconds behind Bottas.
Definitely could have competed for that second spot.
Yeah. And, the week before we said Lando would be the only one to challenge. Last week we wrote him off because we basically said McLaren.
He obviously listened to On The Esky that week.
Yeah, McLaren have, their competitions against Ferrari, and Ferrari did finish 5th and 8th, I believe, in this.
Yeah.
In Sainz and Leclerc. But if they're there, I think they've got a car that can compete. They've definitely got it quick in the straights. They show that they can get podiums. This is Lando's third place, I think, so far. He's got a few. If he can be consistent, I think I said this last couple of weeks ago, if he can be consistent at third place, then if the others, fall off, have struggles, then maybe, string a couple of wins together towards the end.
Yeah.
He could be there very competitive.
Sure.
Yeah. So that was his third podium. He's got third in the 3 that he's been there. Perez has just pipped him on standings at the moment, 104 to 101.
Perez third or Bottas?
Third.
Yeah. Bottas then.
Bottas is fifth.
Fifth. There you go.
A little bit of a gap there, as much of a gap as there is.
Yeah, well, it's those top 4 are clearly dominating, and then Lando's kind of snuck himself into that conversation with the Mercedes and Red Bull. Can they compete deep? We'll have to wait and see. I think, as we talked, Hamilton and Verstappen's where it's at. Verstappen is starting to build a lead and getting close. I think this is Max's year.
Yep.
And at 23 years old, I think I saw a stat. He's already got more podiums than Jenson Button did.
Really?
And Button won, of course, he won 1 championship. He's super young, 23. He's going to be there probably for another decade. This could be his year with Red Bull. So this race, outside of those guys, the racing in the middle pack was where it was really interesting. Ferrari, Perez, and Ricciardo essentially were where the race was at. Perez got 2 5-second penalties for pushing Leclerc off the road. Ricciardo did his best kind of competing against Sainz late. He held Leclerc off for a very long time, but Sainz had better tyres and then snuck through to take that 6th place, wasn't it? No.
5th he got.
Sainz got 5th.
Perez 6th.
Perez 6th, but I think Perez got moved back because of his 10-second penalties. If you can do the quick math for me. Ricciardo, very good that he finished 7th, started 13th. Kind of showed what he could have done probably last race if he didn't have the heating problems and the power problems. So I think Ricciardo's there and thereabouts, and McLaren are competing against Ferrari. They did outscore him this week with 3rd and 7th versus 5th and 8th. But that's where that battle is of the tier 2 teams. Then you'll get Gasly has been pretty good. He'll float in there. I very, very liked what Aston Martins has done. They were competitive. That whole middle tier was where the race was at. So it's not a bad competition in the middle. Like I think the last 40 laps of this race, they didn't show Max until barely showed Max out in front.
So he's that far ahead.
He's that far ahead. They're showing the battles in the middle tier of the field. So that probably reflects where F1 is at for this year, unless something drastic happens in the next couple of weeks.
F1 very much like the NRL. You've got like your top 2 teams, top 2 drivers, and then you've got all of these rule changes and stuff as well happening. I will say it's probably better this year though, because last year it was Mercedes. And then Max hopefully trying to push himself in there. Red Bull have caught up a little bit, I say, with Max, and Perez has been really good too. So they've definitely shown they've got pace there. McLaren are slowly working their way into that conversation, beating Ferrari handedly at this point, but they got to, of course, beat them to be the 3rd team. It's whether they can then start pushing themselves in that conversation of being not just the 3rd team, but in that top tier. Maybe not this year, maybe that's a next year thing, but they've got good drivers there, so we'll see how that goes. I wanted to get your thoughts, Marks, on the penalties. It was a bit like watching NRL of old school or an NFL game. Penalties galore in this one. Pretty rough. So we're talking about Lando, who got that 1 5
Lando got
penalty.
1, Perez got 2, and there was a whole bunch of other ones in relation to just driving stupidity.
There were, so I guess Tsunoda had a couple of penalties because
had the exact same penalty for crossing a line poorly to get into the pit lane.
So to get into pit lane, you need to be on the right-hand side of this lane for safety reasons.
Right.
He put his left wheel essentially on the outside of that lane by like 2 or 3 inches.
It's technicalities. It was...
But he did it twice.
I think he might have done it.
Rookie's going to rookie.
Was one of it
even though we're
It's a few inches,
race.
I think he might have done it in qualifying as well.
I'd be interested to see if he did it last week and then they've picked up on it and then they will go and be a bit more strict on it this week, considering it's the same track.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Someone, I can't remember who it was, might have been Vettel got a penalty for exceeding speed limits in the pit lane as well.
Oh, no, it might have been Stroll.
Yes.
His teammate.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a bunch. But the big three was Lando and Perez twice pushing other drivers off the track, and they got penalised. They were in front, and the guy behind was trying to do a dive around the side.
Yeah. So
what are your thoughts?
So Perez was on Leclerc twice, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then Perez on Lando on the other one.
Yeah.
So Perez was involved in all three.
He was. So on the receiving end, early on in the race, it was just a racing incident. So they were both. It was really hard because the turn that two of the penalties
two
were
or
on
three,
is a really wide turn, and you can fit almost 3 cars across on that corner.
But both the penalties on that corner was a guy trying to go around the outside.
Yes. So I think a lot of it came down to who was in front, who had the right to the racing line.
But I think the guy in front in both cases got penalised.
No, so Lando I think was fine. I think he was inside. He was only just ahead, in my opinion.
I think the Lando Perez one. I don't think Lando should have been penalised.
No, he shouldn't have been penalised. The first one for Perez, I think he got hard done in the first one. The second one, Leclerc was definitely in front.
Yeah, Leclerc was in front. Yeah,
and he got pushed off. So deserved for that one, but very very soft penalties. Like you wouldn't have seen that last season.
What is this, a soccer match?
Yeah, like F1 is doing all of these things, changing all these regulations, putting caps on spending so that they can make F1 more competitive. They want wheel-to-wheel racing. They want overtakes. They want a spectacle. Yeah. And then they've come out this weekend and we're like, oh, nah, we don't like that. Yeah. Don't race wheel-to-wheel. Yeah. Don't push people off the track. Like, so I don't know.
What was interesting was, I'll take your point, like all of the three, like 2 of them, the guy was behind, but I'd say that guy has dived into like a racing line or a small window, which is probably never going to result in an overtake,
right?
Unless the other driver gives him heaps of room and they use the extra. It was green in this race, the extra green overrun space that they give off the kind of track. So you literally have one wheel on track and the rest of your car is on the extra curb to make this overpass happen. So there's, and then the driver kind of in front that, maintained his spot in line got penalised from the guy that was probably making a dive or an attack that was never going to come off. So it's whether, there was some chat about, whether to use the soccer term, taking a dive inside to then get a penalty on their competitor in front when realistically that move was never going to take out. So a little bit of milking to use some more cross-code languages.
I think that Lando was fine for me.
I think those two.
He took the racing line. He was in front. Perez was definitely coming up on the outside. I think his push was just a little bit too late to get in front. Yeah. So that was where Lando had the line and pushed Perez.
I think the first Leclerc one, there was no way he was ever making that overtake.
No.
And I think it was a bit rich that Perez got a penalty on that. The second one, where yes, he was a front.
Yeah.
You want those guys wheel to wheel competing in that, because to use the comparison, I think Jeremy Clarkson, who's a massive, of course, F1 top gear, the name,
Motorhead.
Came out and said, definitely big Motorhead, was just like, just let the boys race. Like there was, even if they didn't win out in that situation and they went backwards, don't penalise anyone. Just like that's just racing, and just keep going with it, and Leclerc can come up and then try to make another overtake. We're at such a pinnacle of the sport of motor racing that they're so careful with, you don't want to dive a car inside and then you just ram that in the side of the other car and then they both spin out, whack it in the wall kind of thing. They've got to be so careful about, so strategic about the moves that they've got to be executed in a way that, wheel-to-wheel racing is pretty hard to do because you're such on the pinnacle and the edge of what this sport is capable of. It'd be really, not to use the supercars as an example, but that's one. It's an enclosed vehicle, so it's slightly different again. But NASCAR, same thing. They just bang willy nilly. They crash into each other all the time. But since we're at the absolute pinnacle of what motorsport is, especially for open wheel vehicles, that they've kind of restricted themselves a little bit on what the car is actually capable of. So that's why you get the processions, and that's why the overtakes, not a choreographed, but you need the arbitrary DRS where it opens up and lets you have a significant time advantage, so you can make an overtake. Because the yesteryear of the 90s and early 80s, where it was wheel-to-wheel cars, you'd be side by side nearly throughout the entire lap.
It's just we had that championship where Senna took out, I can't remember who it was, the guy who was vying for the championship in the first corner of the race so that he could win the championship. Like he purposely crashed into, allegedly crashed into someone to win the championship. Like you couldn't see that happening nowadays.
Right.
No.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that highlighted in this race as well was they penalised these like racing incidents, but then there were occurrences of other things that should have been penalised that didn't, that were more severe in terms of safety. I can't remember what they were. I just remember hearing that somewhere. So it's a little bit of, I don't know. Yeah, it's something the track can follow. So Silverstone not this weekend, next weekend. So back in England, we'll have the first sprint race. So where the new rules where they're going to have a race on Saturday of, I think it's 20 laps from memory.
And that's for points?
That's for points, and that's for then also position for pole sitters for the actual race on Sunday.
Right.
Yeah. So they're going to have a short, sprint race as they're calling it. I think it's 20 laps. Probably depends on the course. It'll be distance.
Okay.
So if it's 300 kilometers for the main race, they might do 50 kilometers for the sprint race, and then that'll equate to whatever that is for that racetrack. But Silverstone's the first one. It'll be really interesting. Because I guarantee is one of these cars has a major crash on Saturday. They're going to say this is the shittest idea ever because they're going to have to rebuild that car overnight to get it ready for Sunday. But I see that a lot in supercars though. That does happen a lot where they have the sprint races on because they'll do sprint races across days. Car will have a big crash on Saturday. The mechanics will work all night to get that car ready so it can go out on Sunday. But then supercars is very different to what F1 does. We're not talking about £300 million worth to spend. That's right. 1,000 people working on this year round. So
definitely not. Yeah, we're looking at that, and we'll have a better breakdown of how the sprint race will work next week, I guess.
Definitely. And final note on F1, unfortunately for us, the Aussie GP has been cancelled for another year, as well as the MotoGP.
Why are they doing this shit? Is it the Australian government that's doing it, or
it's essentially the restriction. So for F1 to come over here, they'd have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine to then do the actual race. So a race week with their racing schedule, they can't spend 3 weeks in Australia essentially. So logistically, it just doesn't work. So they'll postpone it for another year, and then hopefully next year they'll be back.
Yep,
fingers crossed.